Talk radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening, Fade to Black. How you doing? Today's Monday, February 3rd, 2025. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Let's do this, man. Yeah, kicking off another week here on Fade to Black. This week's a little different because it's going to be a little bit short because we have the Conscious Life Expo this weekend. But you can help support the show and all of our hard work around here by getting yourself a Fade to Black t-shirt. We have 2 shirts, 2 ways to get them. The links are below. Everything's autographed and includes shipping. Help support what we do. All right, this week on Fade to Black tonight, Aaron Judkins is back with us. It's been a minute. And tonight we're going to talk about my favorite subject, Gobekli Tepe. That's right. And tomorrow night, Heather Arnold is here. We're going to be talking about giants in Aruba. Wednesday night, Riz Verk is back with us. He's fresh off the Saul Foundation conference, and we're going to talk about that and the white paper that he has written. And that is Wednesday night. Thursday, we are off air. That's right. I will be at the Conscious Life Expo. I will see everybody there. Biggest conference in the world. All right. So that is going down Thursday night. Now, yes, of course, I just mentioned the Conscious Life Expo. I have 5 major events coming up, including the Conscious Life Expo this week, which is February 7th through the 10th, 2025, this weekend. I want to mention that there are just a few tickets left for my disclosure lunch, which is on Sunday. And if you are waiting to purchase tickets for that on location, which a lot of people do, you can't do that. You have to get them online because we have to order food and get all of that ready before the conference. So if you're attending the conference, go now and get your tickets to the disclosure lunch because it's going to be sold out. All right. All right. I do that every year. People come up to me at the conference. Can you get me in? I told you it was going to sell out. You can't do it. Okay. So everybody, I'm just letting you know, there's just a few tickets left for that. Okay. All right. After that, Rise of the Guardians. That is March 29th and 30th, 2025 in Sedona, Arizona. Links are below. Then I head to the Midwest for the Contact Modalities Expo, May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in Delavan, Wisconsin at Delavan Lake. Then I'm back here in Los Angeles for Contact in the Desert, May 29th through June 2nd in Palm Springs, California. And then immediately after that, I head to Peru for the Inca Celebration of the Sun with Brian Forrester, one of 2 trips that I'm taking to Peru this year. The links for those tours are also below. I'm hosting all of these events. I'm presenting at these events. And the links for everything are below. I will see you out there. Got a very busy 2025 coming up. All right. Now, tonight, Dr. Aaron Judkins is with us. And I've known Aaron for a very, very long time. And tonight we're going to cover Gobekli Tepe. But he's an archaeologist. And he looks at things differently, as I think all archaeologists should. All right, looking for links, not only to modern times, but back to the past. And to do that, you got to be a maverick. And also to do that, you have to wear a really cool hat. And we will get to that in just a second. Oh, wait a minute. Aaron, where's your hat? Wait, you're not on the air yet, so you still have time to put it on. You want to go with that? See, I can see Aaron backstage in the green room. You guys can't. I was hoping he was going to wear. Oh, he's going to go get it. He's going to go get it. Right on. But he holds a Ph.D. in Biblical Archaeology. He's a scholar, he's an author, he's a film producer, and he is known for that relentless pursuit of uncovering history's most intriguing mysteries. That's what he does. He goes all around the world as he is digging up as an archaeologist that hat there you go, Aaron. Much better, bro. Much better. And we're going to talk about some of his past projects, like looking for Noah's Ark and the Dead Sea Scrolls and other sites around the world. I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black. The links for Aaron are below on our website and throughout social media. I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black the one and only Aaron Judkins. Aaron.
Jimmy.
Much better. Much better. You got to look, if you are a Maverick archaeologist, you got to look. Theatrics is half of the sale, my friend.
Yeah, that's right. You know, this has been all over the world with me, and
that's right, man.
I've been through a couple of them, so this is the latest one, but it's been around for 7-8 years now. But
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And before I ask the obvious questions, like, how have you been? It's been a while. Let's get straight to it because we have a lot to cover.
Yeah.
I am going to start here. I don't talk religion on the show. Okay. I don't, but I talk about the conspiracy of religion that I'm an expert in. Right. So, and I think all of us are. So I want to ask this first. There are so many sites around the world that go back to the megalithic that are extremely intriguing. And there's a story there that has been preserved for us, but we have to decode it, right? And the other part of it is we're always looking for a religious connection. It doesn't matter what culture, but there's a possible religious aspect to this, but neither seems to get uncovered. Why is it so difficult?
Well, that's a great question, Jimmy. And thanks for having me back on Fade to Black here with you. It's great to be back with you on the show and your listeners. Well, it's archaeology is putting pieces of the puzzle of the past, back together as well as you can. A lot of times we just have small pieces of the puzzle and a pottery shard and some kind of a tool or an artifact, or in writing. Writing's a gold standard because writing can identify who and what time period, etc. So that's really a gold standard when you find writing. Writing is the thing that archaeologists look for because that can really help you nail down the time frame at that site. But not just writing, iconography can do that. Symbols can do that. So this is another way of conveying language. And we just know that from other parts of the world, there have been, things that archaeologists found that verify a religious tie to what the ancients were doing. For instance, you're about to go to Peru, and anywhere in the south and central part of South America, Central South America, you'll see evidence of the Aztecs and the Incas. Now, where you're going to is you'll be around a lot of sites, but you'll probably pass in Peru some ancient pyramids, and you'll pass.
Yeah. I've seen many. This will be my third trip to Peru.
Yeah,
in a year. It's like my third trip. So I will have by the end of this year, I will have been to Peru 4 times in 2 years.
Wow. Yeah. So I was down there in 2014 with L.A. Marzulli and Chase Kleski and a number of others, Joe Taylor, and down there with Brian Forrester. And back when Senior Juan was alive.
I remember. I remember that trip. Yeah, it was an important trip.
It is, because we studied, we had access to over 30 skulls that we studied. I in particularly wrote a report on 4 of those elongated skulls. But getting back to your question, was there is a religious aspect to what the ancients believed. There was a religious ideology. Why? Because on those pyramids, we see that, not in every case, but in some cases, they're performing human sacrifices. It doesn't go as extreme in all cultures like that, but we do see that in Quetzalcoatl, that serpent, that feathered serpent pyramid. Look, so they built it where when the sun comes down, during the solstice, and it shines that light right down on the serpent that's coming down that pyramid, it casts a shadow, and you can see that shadow moving down the pyramid as that thing comes down to the ground. And it kind of looks like, it makes it look like it's alive because of the shadowing effect of the sun. People come together for that event. It's a big thing, and they like to watch it. That's all a religious, symbology to their cosmology. And so we see that they had beliefs in the afterlife. We see this all the way from Egypt to the afterlife, to every culture. The Native Americans, they have a belief in the afterlife. So in the terminology, that if we would say the word religion now, you may have a different picture in your mind about that, but to the ancients, religious ideology was about the afterlife and after this physicality is done. And so they believed in the netherworld, they believed in the cosmos, and they believed that your spirit continued on. So in that sense of the word, yes, they did believe in the afterlife. And this goes back all the way back to the very beginning, Jimmy. So it's not the same concept in what we would think of as religion now, because that word has a little bit different meaning today than it, but to them, they do have a belief in the afterlife, and it was important to them.
Now, the other side of it, and this is where a great archaeologist, not a good one, a great one, will think outside of the box instead of like staying in the lane, right? So when we go to a site, tonight we're going to talk about Gobekli Tepe. It's like the premier example of what I'm about to ask you. But when you go to a site where the older that it is, the less is known about it. And we get to a point where nothing is known. Absolutely nothing. And so when you look at something like Pumapunku, nothing, right? Nothing. Yeah. You have the Incas, but when the Inca got there, which was modern history, by the way, right? And the Incas were there for 100 years. That's it. 110, 120 years. And they came and went. Before them, the megalithic side of things, and this not only ties to Peru, but you can also go into Central America. But this is also all over the Middle East, where you get to those cultures and nobody knows. Everybody that arrived there, most of these temple sites were already built. They were already there. Baalbek in Lebanon, perfect example.
Yeah.
Gobekli Tepe. We know absolutely nothing about that. And that's the part of archaeology that needs to be fully embraced, where you go outside of the box and thinking about this and trying to stay conventional isn't going to get it done, does it?
Well, I mean, the conventional way is the way that traditional archaeology works, and it's needed. I mean, you have to have, it's a science, and you need to be able to be methodical in cataloging and recording. Back when I was in Israel during 2017, we discovered the 12th Dead Sea Cave, in Qumran. So this is where the corpus of the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 11 caves from 1947 to 1957. We excavated a cave there in Qumran near Cave 4. We were the first team in 60 years since Roland DeVoe excavated in that area to excavate in a cave. In our cave, turned out to be a Dead Sea Scroll cave. Why? Because we found Second Temple period material culture in that cave. We brought in Dead Sea Cave experts. We brought in Dead Sea Scroll experts. We brought in other experts and other things. And they all verified, yes, this is, now we can classify this as a Dead Sea Scroll cave, cave 12. And because of that, now it made the history books. I mean, it made the front cover of National Geographic in December 2018. So the point is that traditional archaeology is important. The methodology is important still. But the way you think about how you interpret a site can be fluid. And this is kind of the approach I took with Gobekli Tepe, because how I like to look at things, Jimmy, is sometimes we get focused in, we get laser focused in on a specific thing at the site, and we can't see the forest for the trees. And so, look, back in 2012, there was a guy who sent me something. He said there's some ancient script in the deserts of New Mexico. I said, well, send me what you have. It's Paleo-Hebrew script. Paleo-Hebrew went out of favor in 500 BC.
Mm-hmm.
This is the pictographical old form of Hebrew, but yet it's in the village of Los Lunas on a mountain called Hidden Mountain. And so I was very intrigued. So I went out there. I made many trips out there to see what was written on this 80-ton boulder that kind of fell down the mountain. It's kind of turned sideways, but on it is the abridged version of the 10 Commandments. It's called the Decalogue Stone. And so I made multiple trips out there. I produced a video on it, but I didn't really have an answer. We just put it out. I made one more trip back there, Jimmy, and I realized that I needed to kind of widen my lens out a little bit. What I call do a 35,000 foot flyover. And let me widen out the angle here. I went to the universities at Santa Fe and Albuquerque. I interviewed archaeologists there. I mean, I was really doing the due diligence and the research. I happened to be at the library. I was standing in line to get this book, and a lady hears me over talking about doing this. She taps me on the shoulder and she said, she said, sir, are you researching this site at Los Lunas? I said, yeah. And she said, can I tell you something? She said, I grew up in this area. And she said, it wasn't until I was an adult that my mother told me that we had Jewish ancestry. And I said, really? And she said, if you notice when you're driving out, she said, you'll notice in the cemeteries, there's stars of David, and they go back to the 1800s. And I said, really? She said, you need to check the census records. So I went back and checked the census records, and there was about 15 families between 1840 and 1860 who migrated out of Germany to where they would go to basically just live, because they were being, kind of pushed out of some of these sites, and or some of the areas. And between 1840 and 1860s, one of them. And so I found it on the census records. So the Ockman's razor approach was that this was what they called a crypto-Jewish community. They were crypto-Jewish because they changed their last names when they came into America, because they didn't want their names known, their last names known. They were crypto-Jews. She said, my mother on the weekends, every Friday night evening when the sun went down, my mother would close the curtains and light the candles. And she said, we didn't really know anything until later on. She said, there's a crypto-Jewish community here. Matter of fact, Santa Fe was known as the Little Jerusalem way back when. They were the first bankers.
Is that true?
It's true.
Really?
They were
I never knew that.
That's true. They funded in the very early stages of Santa Fe before is a modern day city. The Jewish community, and there's a small Jewish community there, but they actually funded the first Catholic church in Santa Fe. And so this is well known and documented in Santa Fe.
So are you suggesting that this community carved that stone?
They did.
Yeah.
It's no older than 1840. Why did they do it? It's because they went to the highest point in that area where they lived. And it's a place where they called Hidden Mountain because it was kind of tucked away back there. It's not very high, but they basically were remembering the law given on Mount Sinai, and they wrote it in the best Paleo Hebrew that they could remember, because they didn't get it exactly right.
Yeah, that's my question. How did
Yeah.
they know about Paleo Hebrew in 1840?
Well, they probably had they probably had a religious leader there in their community that started one of the local synagogues. And matter of fact, there's an old one in New Mexico. I think the oldest one in New Mexico is in man, I may get this wrong, and don't hold me to it, but it's like Las Cruces or somewhere. It goes back to like the 1600s or the 1700s, and it's a synagogue. But probably one of the religious leaders in that community was taught that at some point, but didn't get it quite right. So he had to substitute Greek letters in there for it. So that's why you have the substitutions. And so the script is not a formal script. It's just the best script that they could remember. But it was an abridged version, which means that they were teaching this in remembrance of the law to their children. I think this is the best explanation for that site. And how I did it was I broadened out the scope, because contextually, there's nothing else in there around that site. The Battalion of Mormon was near there, but they didn't go by this site. They sent someone out in the 1950s to investigate it, and they said, this wasn't us. They kept very good records. They said, this was not us. And so we ruled that out. And then there was some other, other theories. There was a Lost Nation sailor that they left, and he, none of it contextually fits. The simplest explanation with Achman's razor is that this crypto-Jewish community between 1840 and 1860 settled in this area, and we see them on the census record. Okay, so how I
know what?
that,
well, let me jump in. Let me jump in.
Yeah.
I find this really interesting, because that's not the only Paleo Hebrew 10 Commandment artifact found in the United States.
Yeah,
there are many, and some of them were in the possession of indigenous tribes that they had been carrying with them for a while. And so could that be the explanation? I mean, many theories go into this, including my own, where I'm thinking, man, it much older?
There's one called the Bat Creek Stone. I think that's got.
Oh yeah, the Bat Creek Stone is one of the. Yeah.
It's a smaller artifact. It's on stone. As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues just a couple of weeks ago, tracked that thing down. You're not going to believe what happened. She found it in the basement. It's just the craziest thing. It was in the basement, I think. You can't make this stuff up. It was in the basement of the Smithsonian, I think. And so she's in discussions now about that artifact. I know Scott Walter and other people have looked at it. I've not studied that particular one. But look, people say that stone in the village of Los Lunas is a hoax. It's not a hoax. It was done by real people who, in a real community called the village of Los Lunas, who lived there, and they were teaching this to their children as a remembrance of the giving of the law on Mount Sinai.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
There was not to stay on this point. We have so much to talk about, but I've seen there's a little stone. It's about this big that's got Paleo Hebrew on it. It's two-sided. It's got the 10 Commandments, 5 on one side, 5 on the other, right? And it's about this, and there, the thoughts on that, there's a certain amount of provenance to it that goes back a couple of hundred years.
Let me just
but before that, we don't know. And so my point being that, it's easy to speculate that maybe that came over here a couple of thousand years ago, and that somebody was here, because of Paleo Hebrew being 500 BC.
Yeah. It's interesting. The Native American Cherokee tribe has linguistic language roots to Hebrew, to the Hebrew language. There's a commonality in their word structure to Hebrew. So that's just an interesting note, but it is quite an interesting concept about, who was over here. And, I just put out an article on Substack called America BC ? And I list all the potential civilizations that could have made it over here prior to, Columbus. We know that Columbus didn't discover America. But look, there's a lot of things that when you start looking at it with an approach that I took to the Village of Lost Luna site, I applied that same approach to Gobekli Tepe. I widened out the angle. I did a broad overview of the region, and I wanted to see contextually what was happening in the region. And Jimmy, what I discovered was a lot of commonality between Gobekli Tepe and the neighboring sites. And so after about 5 years of research on this has led me down a journey that I think has given some answers in a common sense way, just like with the Village of Los Lunas, that I think we can practically apply their theory. I'm proposing theories. I'm not saying this is 100%, empirical proof. I'm saying I'm proposing new theories for the site, and we'll get into those, but they're amazing. And once you see it, you'll go, aha.
You're not going to break hearts, are you?
No, I don't think so, because it actually gives, I think, some reasonable answers to some of the things that are happening at Gobekli Tepe. It doesn't explain everything. Look, 5% has only been excavated. That means 95% still under the ground. We know at least 20 enclosures that are still buried under the ground at Gobekli Tepe. It took 10 years alone just to excavate enclosure D. Mm-hmm. So it's a painful process, because it's all got to be done correctly. Then you have to catalog all that stuff and then write it down, and then and then it has to be published. And this is why information is so slow coming out of Gobekli Tepe. But look, just out of the last year or so, I kept having to update the book. I couldn't even put it down. Things were kept coming out, and I kept putting these things in the book because information is just kind of trickling out. But we do know something very important. Archaeologists said that, especially Klaus Schmidt, who was the first director there from the German Institute of Archaeology, said people came to the site, they maybe lived there 2 or 3 months, and then they left. Now they know people lived at the site. And now we know, just recently, that they found 3 human burials at Gobekli Tepe. So we see rectangular structures adjacent to the enclosures. We know people lived at the site full time, and they buried their dead just like they did at Çatalhöyük, which was a neighboring site. It probably had about 10,000 people living at that one site. It's been very well documented and researched and published. So when you look at these neighboring sites, that kind of helped me put these puzzles into place with Gobekli Tepe. So there's some fascinating insights that we'll discuss.
When I was a kid, I had a friend. His name was Sean, and this is in high school. This is in Central America. And anyway, I was into guitar and Led Zeppelin, right? Black Sabbath. I was doing my thing. I'm 14 years old. And Sean, who's really cool, right? But he wore like sandals. Well, we all did. But he had like leather sandals. The rest of us wore surfer slaps. But he had long hair. And he was always reading ancient history and prehistory books, right? I was reading Lord of the Rings and smoking weed, right? But he was always, this intellectual. And I said, what's going on? He goes, man, when I grow up, I'm going to be an archaeologist. And I was like, man, that ain't cool. Right. But as I hung out with him over the years, he really turned me on to his fascination with ancient history. It was mind blowing. I lost track. I often wondered that guy's going to pop up. He's going to pop up in my life again. He is. He's going to be a guest on this show. But archaeology's always fascinated me. It's just tremendous. And then when you look at Gobekli Tepe and you apply the archaeology there, the facts that have been unveiled about Gobekli Tepe at this point are completely singular, right? They're like a singular. We only have a case of one, right?
Oh,
deliberately. Well, okay. Okay. Now, as I say that, and you say, "Oh well," I've always said, Aaron, that Gobekli Tepe can't be the only one.
You're right.
Right now, it is.
Yeah.
But it can't be. You know,
Well,
and what are we going to do when we do another one? Now we have Karahan and we have the other sites that are around there,
Yeah,
sure,
yeah, yeah.
or right for another example.
Yeah.
But deliberately buried. Let's start there because I want to talk about the cosmology too as well.
Okay.
So, what do you deduce with that? Are there other cases around the world where a site like that was deliberately buried in situ by the culture in that time period?
Karahan Tepe was deliberately buried. That's the neighboring site near Gobekli Tepe. Everybody knows about Karahan Tepe if you've been following this subject. That was deliberately buried. There has been debate in the scholarship at Gobekli Tepe. At first, they said it was deliberately buried. Then they have changed their position, I think, and they said, well, because it's on the side of a hill and those enclosures were down at the bottom over time, the overburden came in and it just naturally filled all that up. I think the answer to Gobekli Tepe is yes to both. Yes, it was deliberately buried. Why? Because at Gobekli Tepe, they found stone faces, okay, and they're large stone heads, okay, and they were deliberately defaced. So they've had the noses cut off. They were placed upside down in the enclosures and buried, positionally buried that way. Same thing at Karahan Tepe, which was deliberately buried. Why would they do that? It was probably later on, as the site was probably abandoned. But there's no question that these stone heads, and the same is true at Karahan Tepe. They have taken the heads, they have defaced some of them, turned them upside down, and buried them. Then I think the second part of that is that over time, that yes, some of that infill and things that from the overburden did come in, and it just filled in the site naturally over time. So I think the answer is yes to both. But we do see it at Karahan Tepe. The question is, why would they do that? And I think it's probably after the habitation of the sites that people came along at some point and they go, what's this thing about? Who did this? I mean, they probably didn't even know. We don't know. But if they did know, let's just assume that they did, because we don't know. Whatever they were doing in those enclosures or at Karahan Tepe, it was taboo to them. And so they said, you know what? We're taking these stones. We're going to deface them. We're going to put them upside down. We're going to bury it. So nobody could get access back to this site again. So it's pretty common in the ancient practice for them to, the pharaohs did this in Egypt. You got another pharaoh come.
They did. It's all over Peru.
Yeah.
Maya, the Spanish came in, and I get that approach, but the other side of it for me is that if you are why put the effort into we got to put our mindset into the time period. All right, so. When you back this up 12,000 years, right, 10,000 BC, and you go back, the amount of effort put into building the site and then to turn around and abandon it, you have to ask why. If another culture comes in, doesn't know anything about the site, and they don't want it to overlap or change the direction of their civilization religiously or other reasons, right? I could kind of see that, but we have to back up before that and ask, why would you abandon a site that you have occupied and built for 1,000 years? Yeah,
that's right. Gobekli Tepe was occupied between 1,000 years and 1,500 years. So it was, and we know that because some of the enclosures and the teak pillars in there some of them had fallen over. They were repaired. Repairs were made within the structurally of some of the enclosures over time, and then we see as the newer enclosures were built on the newer layers, that the architecture construction of the site became a little bit sloppier. It wasn't as refined as the older layers were. They really took their time. They did it right, And we see some of the newer layers over time were just kind of done a little bit sloppier for whatever reason. But the site, let's say it was occupied for 1,500 years, and then they left. The question is, why would they leave that site? And here's what I'm thinking. I'm just thinking out loud. If you're living along the Fertile Crescent, right at the highest point of the Jurmis mountain range, and you're overlooking the plains of Haran, you have all this wild wheat. You have two forms of wild wheat. You have wild barley, which we know they were harvesting those cereals and bringing them back. They found, hundreds and hundreds of grinding stones, mortars, and pestles to make flour with that. We know that they found these big stone vats at Gobekli Tepe where they put the barley in, and they were fermenting that barley into beer. They had these big ritual feasts there. We do know that they were hunting gazelles and antelope and these big wild Auric bulls. They stood 9 foot at the shoulder. These bulls did. And it took probably dozens of men to bring one of these animals down. But look, when you did, that fed your family and your entire community for a long time.
Wait, Aaron. Pump the brakes. Back the car up.
Yeah.
What do you mean a bull that was 9 foot at the shoulders?
Yeah, they were called Aurics, big Auric bulls. We know that the people in that time frame, we're talking about the Neolithic, specifically the pre-pottery Neolithic, they were known as people of the bull. Why? Because they had deified this animal. It's the most powerful creature that was in that area. We see this at a neighboring site called Chattahoolic, where they had taken
Wait. Don't skate around. 9 foot at the that's as big as an elephant.
Yeah. It's they were huge. They're extinct now, but they were huge creatures. And we see a painting on a mural at Chattahoolic where dozens, probably 24 men or more are around one of these things with spears trying to bring it down. It's on a mural there. So we know that they have venerated this particular animal. It was absolutely a huge animal. But we see that my point is that there's plenty of wild food and game and water, everything they needed to live for 1,500 years at the site. And then something happened that forced them to move. And what that something was, I think, because now we're post Younger Dryas, right? Post Younger Dryas and everything. And then there's a sudden emergence of civilization after that Younger Dryas event. There's a sudden emergence of civilization. But something forced them to move. And I think they had to, Jimmy, because suddenly after 1,500 years, I think something happened to the climate or the ecology. And maybe it was a water issue, but the grains and the animals that they had relied on for living there for so long suddenly dried up, and it forced the animals to move, and they had to move where the animals were going. And maybe the second part of that, it was just a sedentary lifestyle that developed later on in agriculture, and they formed more communities at neighboring sites like Chattahoolic, and they just went to a different region, and over years of time, they just formed into a bigger community. Those are some of the things that come to mind when I think about that. We don't know the exact answer to it, but I think those are plausible and reasonable explanations about why they would move. It would have to be something like that to really force them out of there. If you don't have your water supply or your grain or the animals that you're used to hunting. It's like the Native Americans, when they lost the buffalo, they lost their life. They lost their livelihood. They relied on that animal to live. So
shouldn't we see, and we do, there's some evidence of T-pillars at different sites in the area.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah.
Are they as elegant as Gobekli Tepe?
The first ones the first ones ever discovered was at a site called Navali Chori. That's the first T-column site ever discovered.
Right.
And neighboring sites, Karahan Tepe, Jerf El Amar, I think that's in northern Syria. There's other places, but in the region, there's neighboring sites.
What I am suggesting here is that we haven't found evidence of the culture itself planting stakes and continuing. That's the part it's confusing to me. Do they just fold into the rest of society?
They could have.
You know,
They could have. Something forced them to move. Where they moved, we don't know. But look, if you look at the neighboring sites like Çatalhöyük, who had 10,000 people living at that site. Of course, this is later past Gobekli Tepe.
Later. Yeah, much later.
Yeah, but again, you're seeing people living more of a sedentary lifestyle. They're more in a permanent community dwelling. They had individual housing. They buried their dead under the floor. They were still practicing the same lifestyle. They just moved. And so it may be that they just had to move for those reasons. Could it be the same culture? It very well could be the very same culture. And the reason I say that is because the architectural similarity at the neighboring sites in the region all have a commonality. T-pillar construction, megalithic architecture, iconography, anthropomorphism, zoomorphic images, the religious ideology at the sites, especially Karahan Tepe, ithiophalic symbols. There's a
lot of penis there.
There is, phallic images,
yes.
And I found an answer to that. Why that is because a lot of these phallic images are headless people with a phallic image, but they're dead.
Well, but you also have Urfa Man.
You have Urfa Man, which is great. Urfa Man is not ithiophalic; it's anthropomorphic, but it's the largest stone statue.
Phallic. Oh, there's.
well, yeah, you're right. I've never seen it just in the picture, but yeah, there is a sense to that. You're absolutely right. It stands about 6 foot high. It's contemporaneous with Gobekli Tepe. It was found near the modern day of Şanlıurfa, which is about, I think, 9 miles from Gobekli Tepe. It's the old biblical Edessa, where the biblical This is going back to those times. So but it's contemporaneous with Gobekli Tepe. It's fascinating because this stone structure actually has a face. It has that V-neck kind of collar.
Yeah, beautiful. No, he's clothed.
Yeah, he's clothed. He's got obsidian stone eyes.
So stoic, and there's a lot of vocals. There's a lot of voice there. You can see it, right? There's there's a presence. He's saying something. Plus, he's got two hands on his pee too as well. But
yes,
is there? I don't want to get sideways because I want to talk about the cosmology too as well. I think that there is something there. I don't know what it is. We're all trying to get the answers. But do you think? And here we are. We're in modern day Turkey, but today. But when Gobekli Tepe was constructed, that was the Armenian highlands. Right.
Yes.
That's what we really need to stop and examine this, where not only do we have Abraham and other biblical, both in Islam and in Christianity.
Sure.
We've got some very serious biblical locations here.
Right.
Do you think that there is, it's kind of a yes or no question, but we can explore it a little bit. Do you think that there is a Christian tie to Gobekli Tepe?
Okay.
A biblical tie. No, let me say biblical.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The Christian tie, no. A biblical tie, yes. And I can preface that with a longer answer, but specifically Christian time, no, because this is before the time of the advent of Christianity.
Yeah. I said the wrong thing, but a biblical tie, like a Dead Sea Scroll, Old Testament biblical situation.
Okay. I think indirectly, let me be more precise. I think indirectly the answer is yes, not directly. And here's why I say that, because when you're right in this, right there at Şanlıurfa, which is biblical Edessa, this is where Abraham lived with his father. Even the Muslim communities at Şanlıurfa say this is the birthplace of Abraham.
So and they hit it with a rock, man. It's right there.
Yeah, they acknowledge that, and it's embedded in their culture, and they acknowledge it, and they're proud of it. But we see this is an area where Abraham's father worshiped the moon god. And when Abraham's father Terah dies, Abram, who went by Abram at that time, was 75 years old, and then God calls him out of that region. Okay, we see neighboring sites like Jericho worship the moon god, Sogmatar worship the moon god. Sites around the region are often flanked by two males worshiping a crescent moon standard. This is documented in archaeology, so we know that they have deified the moon. So when you're looking at this aspect of Gobekli Tepe, you have to ask, well, what were they doing in these enclosures? Because we know they were normal people. They were living at the site. They were hunting. They were, they weren't farming, but they were harvesting these wild grains there along the plains of Haran. But they were also doing something in these sacred spaces. These enclosures, probably not all of them, but enclosure D and other ones were, I think, regarded as sacred spaces. And why? Because they were doing something in those sacred spaces that was set apart from a normal everyday activity. And so when I say a biblical tie, I'm saying that they had a religious ideology that brought them together at Gobekli Tepe. So how archaeology states in the record formally is that people came together, they formed communities, they had food, they formed defensive positions, and agriculture came as a result of all that. And then at the very end, religion came at the end. But Gobekli Tepe is just the opposite. Gobekli Tepe is in the Stone Age. You have megalithic architecture that's not supposed to be there. And you have a religious ideology that has brought them together at that site for a central purpose. It wasn't because of agriculture. So Gobekli Tepe turns everything upside down in archaeology. That's why it baffled archaeologists and it still does. Klaus Schmidt even acknowledged that there was a religious component to Gobekli Tepe. Now, he called it a temple. Now, modern day, the archaeologists now running the site kind of distanced themselves from that terminology. And I understand that because it's not a formal temple in what we would think of, but they had religious ideology that actually brought them together in these sacred spaces. And so, yes, there is a biblical tie, but it's indirect.
Yeah, and so many have, including myself. You try to tie in something, right? Is this really? Were they doing something? Was it a religious site? Was it something else? Was it just a meeting place? Were they just barbecuing and hanging out on the weekends there? Right? Was it something astrological? Pillar 43 and enclosure D, and the part for me, and especially for you as an archaeologist, the technology and the know-how, both as artisan but also engineering, is that you have to leave a lot of extra stone on that work to allow the artist to come in and do their work in relief. And that is a tremendous technological leap for Stone Age man to think in 3D like that. So then I have to back up and go, maybe there's no religion here at all. Maybe there's something more technical. Maybe there's some logistics tied into this site that and to suggest that, Aaron, that takes things to a whole nother level of engineering and astronomy and math. Yeah.
Well, you're right. I think the answer is both yes to all of it. Yes, they had the advanced knowledge and they had the advanced capability. It shows an organization. It shows a division of labor back in the Stone Age. Now, this is not supposed to be there. This megalithic architecture, some of these stones are up to 50 tons. They quarried it from a quarter of a mile away, uphill, and dragged it monolithically, which means they cut out one single piece of stone, and then they set it into the footing and then raised it up, and then they carved all these reliefs on it. They're beautiful reliefs. It's called bas relief, BAS, bas relief in the artistic term, which means that they cut the stone away and then that 3D image pops out. And so that's a fantastic. A lot of these animals called the zoomorphic iconography is representation of animals from the Holocene. I think they serve as spirit guardians in regard to that specific animal. So you have a lot of serpents, and you have a lot of you got scorpions, and you got vultures, and you got
foxes, foxes and cats. The vulture.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But getting back to your point, Jimmy, on was there a religious tie to it as well? Yes, they were advanced in their capability. We know that because the ancients weren't stupid. They were so much smarter than what we give them credit for, and probably smarter. I mean, if you're trying to live the way they live and apply that to us today, we couldn't do it. So yes, they were so much smarter. They were intuitive. They had knowledge. They put it into practice. They were normal people living a normal life, trying to survive the best way that they could. But they also came together in a commonality because they had a similarity in their cosmology and their afterlife belief system. And this is exactly what we see in the enclosure, especially in Enclosure D at Gobekli Tepe.
Now, is it a stretch to suggest a connection to Noah, the flood, and everybody's been searching for the Garden of Eden too as well?
Yeah.
And the biblical version, and then also ground zero for civilization, if you just want to go with the scientific bend on this.
Yeah.
We're always looking for that, aren't we? Could it be Gobekli Tepe or a site like it?
That's a great question, Jimmy. David, other researchers like David Roll suggest that the Garden of Eden was in the vicinity because it was located in this area where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are. There's 4 rivers that are named. We know 2 of them now, but the other 2 are not quite as well known. I think there's David Roll, I think, makes a good case for that. Regarding if it's related to Noah and the Ark, back in 2012, when I wrote this book right here, Alien Agenda, back in 2012, I referenced Gobekli Tepe.
Yeah, great book.
I referenced it. I referenced Gobekli Tepe in the book, which means I knew about it. Not the last time, but one of the early conversations back when we first met was about Gobekli Tepe. Mm-hmm. And you had asked me, I think you sent me a picture, and you had asked me, you said, you said, this looks like a belt. What is it? And I said, that's not a belt. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, well, it's just art designs. It looks like a belt, but it's not a belt. Okay, I'm prefacing this because before I started researching this book, I had a preconceived notion in my mind what Gobekli Tepe was. In the ancient civilizations, we see a lot of standing stones. Standing stones are very common. They're called menhirs. You see probably 50,000 standing stones that once stood in Europe alone. So it's not it's not uncommon at all to see a standing stone. But when you have an anthropomorphic image, 2 of them that are 18.5 foot tall, wearing belts that have fox pelt loincloths in front of them, that changes everything. And when I told you that was not a belt, I was actually wrong. And so
you were wrong. You were. You know what? It takes a man. I'm impressed. But check this out. I'm going to stay on the belts. Let's stay on the belts.
Yeah.
Because what that suggests, that Stone Age man had fashion sense. It's crazy, right? But hold on. I'm going to take it one step further. Then we're going to go back. I want you to finish your thought.
Yeah.
I found the same stone in Tiwanaku. 14 foot tall. Same thing, arms wrapped around the waist, same representation with a belt.
Wow.
With H's on it.
Yeah.
I walked up and I'm looking at this. I'm at Tiwanaku and I'm like, Gobekli Tepe, right? And now, look, I'm not saying anything, but the stone is real. And they don't know how old it is. They don't know how old, but man, if that doesn't remind you of Gobekli Tepe, now it just may be, right, that DNA and evolution, and you're going to represent humans on a stone like this in that fashion. Yes, and you're wearing clothes, and you're now figured out what a belt is, and you're going to, okay, all right, it's possible. They look alike. Okay, so back to your point. You were wrong. I like that.
Yes, I was. You know, I had a guy named Roger. He's a guy out of Canada. He's followed my work for years, and he really prompted me to take another look. I mean, he was on me for months about this, and I was still flying on the helicopter. My other career was a flight medic on a 911 helicopter, and my time was limited. But he was, just short of begging. He goes, Aaron, you got to take another look at this site. And so here was what I was going to say, Jimmy. I had a thought that because of the proximity to Greater Ararat and the high plains of Armenian high plains, I thought this is some kind of, symbolic site that they erected as a remembrance generations later to Noah and the flood. That's why you have all these animals on here. And it's just that. But look, I was wrong. When I started actually researching this and digging down into it, the belt was the very first thing, because I realized it was actually a belt. That was the very first thing that slaughtered my sacred cow. And the other thing was, it wasn't that at all. It wasn't in relation to Noah or the flood. It was something totally different. Why? Because enclosure D is the one that really got me. And so I couldn't find any of this stuff anywhere in one single thing. This is 5 years of research. I've had to pull nuggets out here and there and here and there and follow the little rabbit trails and the clues until I could try to source all this together. And it's been incredible. But I can tell you that is a belt. And the reason I said that initially is because a lot of stone looks like something. I have people say, well, this looks like a dinosaur egg. It's not a dinosaur egg. It's just a rock. And so you see a lot of these things in the rocks that look something what you think it is, but it's not. But actually, this is actually a belt. What we're seeing on these two anthropomorphic pillars in enclosure D. Why? Because they're anthropomorphic and they're wearing fox pelt loincloths. That really started taking me down the journey of what Gobekli Tepe really was.
I'm trying to open up. My monitors are acting funky here. And it's not, I want to show you these images. I've got them pulled up, but what's funny now, Aaron, and I'm just going to say this, it sounds strange to say, I have one curved monitor. Okay. I used to have 3. And now because I have 1, and then my teleprompter, which is above me here, is now screen 2. And so when I open up a second screen, it's trying to open up my teleprompter. So this image of this image of, and it won't let me share that screen. I can't share the screen of, let me see. Hold on. Let me see if, well, it's still not going to do it right. Let me see. Let me see if I can share. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's going to work. Oh, this is off of my teleprompter.
Oh,
okay. So I can't expand it, but there you go. Now let me see. Yeah, I can't click to the next image. I don't have it on my screen. Okay. But you see how the hands wrap around? You see the belt? I can't blow this up. So that's the problem. Let me try something else here. And let me go with this image. And let's see here. Okay. Just give me 1 second, everybody. Just stay with me. Stay with me. I have to do this in another way. And let's see if this works here. This is off of my teleprompter. Okay, so this is the back side. Now remember, this is buried. This is buried in the ground too as well. So, but you can see the size of it.
Yes.
And see how the arms come down and they
Yeah.
come on the front, just like Gobekli Tepe. So is it identical? No, but the similarities are just fascinating to me. And coming down to the cloth, the way that it's bound with the belt at the waist, I found that compelling. And I don't know what it suggests, but it is clearly there. When you go to 12,000 years ago to 10,000 BC, where the traditional and orthodox anthropology and archaeology is going to suggest that we were wearing animal skins. We weren't fashion conscious like this. We didn't have these things, but clearly they're represented not only at Gobekli Tepe, but with Urfa Man and other stuff that was going on. Wouldn't that suggest a different level of intelligence more than history will give credit for?
Sure. I mean, when that Urfa Man is a perfect example. You have shaped around it, which I think signals some kind of a reverence in wearing that cloth. I don't think that was a normal everyday cloth that people were wearing. I think that was a specific cloth, maybe and perhaps related to what those functions were for those sacred spaces and the enclosures. We see in enclosure D, there's bench seating around there. There was a procession into there. It wasn't just a simple door. There was a procession where you actually walked in there. You walked around, everybody sat down in that bench seating. And then you have these two, huge anthropomorphic pillars that are staring down at you. They're doing something in there. I think it has something to do with the ritual libation. And the reason I say that is because one of the other enclosures that's adjacent there, they found shallow stone vessels with groove channels. And those groove channels were for draining liquid. So, and they were, I think, libation vessels. So it's very interesting that some of these things were set aside. Also, they plastered the floors and the walls, which considered it also sacred space. So it's interesting because they set this thing aside. So when they're wearing this kind of dress or their hands are coming to the navel, this is showing reverence to their ancestors. So Easter Island, the hands coming to the navel. You can't see me, but the hands are coming to the navel. The hands coming to the navel symbolizes reverence for the veneration to their ancestors. That's why, because from the navel is where the female gives birth, and this signifies a veneration status. So they're venerating their ancestors by putting their hands to the navel. And
some of the hands are over the heart too, as well.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And later, not to Gobekli Tepe, but at other places they are. Same thing. We say that, our heart represents our soul. This is part of, the inside makeup of who we are. That's probably something very similar. When they do that, it's out of a respect to the soul, where they put their hand over the heart. This is exactly what we do when we say the Pledge of Allegiance. We put our hand over our heart. That's why we do that, because it's a sign of reverence. So the ancients, I think, were doing something very similar in these, with the hands toward the navel, to the navel, and their dress. Of course, we don't see the dress at Gobekli Tepe, but there's a lot there we still need to uncover.
Now, what do we do with, now we're 5 minutes past the commercial break, and we'll set this up for when we return. There is pretty solid evidence, not only in my own research, I haven't been to Gobekli Tepe yet, but with everything that I have seen from other researchers, it seems that, without anything definitive, but there's something astrological going on. There's something going on with the cosmology. and the angle of the degrees on the enclosures seems to move over time, which, you know what I mean? And it would have to do that, right? Because the Milky Way is moving, stars are moving, and the Earth's alignment is moving. And that would suggest a knowledge of the stars in alignment. And you would have to be very careful about these alignments, because it takes a long time to build the enclosure and things move before you finish it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, that's a great theory. I know that others have suggested astrological alignments to there. We see that very same thing at other ancient sites. They're aligned to constellations. That's not surprising if that turns out to be the case at Gobekli Tepe. I would not be surprised if that's the case, because they were so embedded in their cosmology that's oriented them to the stars. And so when they looked up at the stars, they believed this is where you went after you died. You went to the netherworld, but then you were reborn back to the stars. And so they venerated constellations. They venerated their ancestors. But this is exactly, I think, something that they would have practiced. They would have been observing the stars and the patterns of that zodiac. And you're right. As those move, they would probably realign some of those things to keep those within orientation. They did it with the sun. They did it with constellations. So I would not be surprised if that turns out to be the case at Gobekli Tepe.
Now, what do we do with the commonality, especially with Pillar 43, of what may represent the zodiac? And I used to think it was a stretch, but the more that I look and see what's going on, I don't know if it's the sun, the moon, or a star that the vulture is holding. I don't know.
Okay.
But to have what appears to be Scorpio, right in front of you, and these different ideas of the constellations, which graphically didn't appear until 8,000 years later. Right? Dendera would be a good example, but then we're getting into more modern history. It's ancient history. Yeah. But how would the cultures have seen Scorpio or anything else in the constellations enough so to put it on those pillars? Well, would it have come in from other cultures around them? Or is the progenitor of all of this Gobekli Tepe?
We have to make some assumptions there that they actually witnessed those particular constellations. It's problematic in the time frame that you put Gobekli Tepe at 10,000 BC. I think that a more simpler explanation on Pillar 43, and again, this is just me applying Occam's razor to this, because there's a chronology problem with the constellations there. And I think it's a good theory. I'm not ruling it out. I know Andrew Collins did a lot of good work on this. And I think it's still open. I think we should consider every one of these interpretations until we get a definitive empirical answer. So I'm not ruling it out. I think it should still be on the table. My theory is this, Jimmy, is that Pillar 43 is linked to what I call the Regeneration Theory. And this is what I'm getting at. And one of the theories in the book is called the Regeneration Theory. You have a lot of vultures, and vulture is a symbolic icon of life and death. We see it in Egypt. We see the pharaoh wearing, the double headdress. One of them's a vulture. Archaeologists said that was them ruling over Upper and Lower Egypt. But actually, the symbology behind the serpent and the vulture is that the pharaoh has power over life and death. That's what that meant. He ruled Upper and Lower Egypt, but he had the power as a ruling pharaoh because he was a god incarnate. And those two symbols represented him having power over life and death. We see the vulture iconography all over Gobekli Tepe, Nevalachori, other places. The vulture is a representation of a regeneration in the afterlife. And so the ball that you were talking about is actually what I think is an egg. And the vulture, so you have a headless man down at the very bottom right of pillar 43.
Mm-hmm.
This is a dead, someone that has died, but their soul is being regenerated through the vulture, which symbolizes death and rebirth. And they're taking that egg, and it's a regeneration in the afterlife to rebirth you back to a star entity, God, back into the heavens. And so they believe that when you died, that your soul had to go through the netherworld. It had to be destroyed. It had to be crushed and annihilated with fire. But then, because of the veneration of the ancestors, specifically 2 of them, and with the iconography of the vulture, which is important, that means that they take that egg, and that is a cosmic egg that is being rebirthing that person back up to the heavens. So you have to have that so you can be reborn back into the afterlife. And I think this is some of the symbols that we're seeing at Gobekli Tepe, especially at Pillar 43. Now, it doesn't explain all of it, but it does explain some of it. And so when you see those 3 baskets at the top there, I think those 3 baskets they're full of wheat. You see the wheat coming out from the top and from the bottom. They're bundles of wheat. And the wheat was symbolic because everything they did, it represented the afterlife to them. So when the sun came up and went down, that was a birth, and that was going down, and then the moon come up. And then the phases of the harvest, when you get spring, and then you get autumn, and you get the harvest of all that wheat, and you go out there and you harvest all that grain and you bring it back. That's a symbol of death. It's interesting that a germination of wheat takes 9 months, the same as a human gestation in the womb. They tied everything together, nature and their belief in life and death. It was all tied together. So this is why you have these equinoxes that are moving in these phases. They also represented that in their phases of life. In the spring, you get the birth, and then by the time you get over to the autumn and the winter, you're in death. Why? Because there's nothing growing in winter, everything dies. And so this is a symbolic thing that they have understood, that when you die, you go back through the same process. Your spirit has to go through this annihilation before it gets rebirthed. But the vulture is a symbology of life, of that giving you life after death. And you had to have that so you could be reborn. That's the symbol of the vulture. I talk about it in the book, and it's, I lay a foundation for that.
It's a fascinating take. But why preserve it in stone? That's question number 1. And 2, you are suggesting, and I'm suggesting, they must have had a language. There's no way that the organization happens. You have to have a town. You have to have farmers. You have to have engineers. You have to have people doing the quarrying. You have to have maybe defense. You have to have some kind of rule of law. You have to have some kind of upright civilization going on there. And none of that happens without a language.
One of the second theories, let me just back up and answer your first question. Why would they put it in stone? Because Gobekli Tepe was a site they lived there. This was their home. They did everything there. They had ritualistic feasts, but they also had, I think, ritualistic sacred ceremonies. I'm not saying they sacrificed anything there. There's no evidence for that. I'm saying that they probably had some libation ceremonies, maybe perhaps in regards to the ritualistic feasting. Why you would put these symbols on the stone is because the animals would represent guardian spirits. So this is why you get animals that are representation of the Holocene, but they're baring their teeth, they're arching their back, things that could bite you, sting you, claw you, kill you. These are animals that are guardian spirits for the afterlife. You put these in the stones because it is a formal, monumental picture of what's happening in the afterlife. And so this is very important to them. because they know that when you die, your death is not the end. And they understood that. But to get you to be rebirthed back into the afterlife, you had to go through a process. And so what their job is to make sure that you're being helped along the way. And the reason they put this embedded in the stone is because this is part of the rituals, I think, libation ceremonies that are happening in some of these enclosures, particularly in enclosure D. And so you get the guardian spirits, you have these anthropomorphic images, which represent two distinct people. You have a veneration of the ancestors, and you have this monumental iconography embedded in the stone because it is language in a sort. It's telling a story. But
you also have to, but Aaron, I yes, you're absolutely right. But all of this is complex, and it's not done with hand gestures and grunting.
Right.
This is
complex.
Everything that yes.
Yeah.
It has to be discussed. And why are we I'm talking about the village, right? Mm-hmm. And you're the leader of the village. And they're going, okay, so why do we have to do? Well, we have to do this because blah 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 blah. You're going to have that discussion. It has to happen with a language. That's my point.
They did speak a language. Now remember the time frame is pre-pottery Neolithic A, so before the invention of writing, before the invention of pottery,
allegedly,
before the invention. That's right.
Allegedly, yes,
that's right. So here's my second theory that I'm proposing in the book.
But what about other? Oh, hold on, we'll do that when we come back after the break. What about the other cultures in the area? What about Egypt? What about ancient Sumer? What about Mesopotamia and the languages that were being used there?
Oh yeah,
were they the same languages that they were using at Gobekli Tepe?
Oh,
and I would suggest here that this flow of knowledge came from the north, but maybe as far away as Siberia, Denisovan, maybe, and maybe. Yeah. Because if you look, Gobekli Tepe's first in this area, right? And the knowledge, what's that?
It's one of the first.
Hey, I'm not the end all here, but what I do see is a flow of construction that happens from the north and comes to the south and across throughout the Sahara into South Africa.
And here's the thing that backs that up, Jimmy, is Indo-European language. Indo-European language, I think, came from the north. It may have come from the west, but it definitely, I think, came from the north as well.
I think it came from the east. It might have come from Armenia.
As well. I'm sorry, from the east, not from the west, from the east, from the north, from the east.
Okay.
So I stand corrected on that. Thank you. But it's Indo-European language, language, which makes that tie. And what I'm suggesting is that there's something linguistically that connects that to Gobekli Tepe. That's my second theory in the book. It's going to blow your mind because it unveils the layers of the onion. And when you look at that linguistically, you finally starts becoming clearer what the functionality, at least in some of these respects, to Gobekli Tepe, of what they were doing and why they were doing it. It's going to blow your mind. It's amazing.
Okay, we'll pick up when we come back. Our guest tonight, Dr. Aaron Judkins, is with us. We are talking about Gobekli Tepe, and I told everybody in the beginning, we're going to do a little bit of everything tonight. I'll be right back after this short break. This is Fade to Black. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Gobekli Tepe. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. Today we're headed to Bolivia, Tiwanaku, Peru, and of course, Pumapunku. Brian, exciting. Thank you so much for everything, my friend.
Always an honor. Right behind us is the sacred river of the Inca that goes past Machu Picchu. So we're going to be driving up to its source at 15,000 feet above sea level and then down to Lake Titicaca.
So today we hit 15,000 feet.
Yes.
Crazy. And you can do it with us. All you have to do is go to hiddenincatours.com. Simple. We've got 2 tours coming up next year, one in June for the summer solstice, right? And then another one right here in November. So hiddenincatours.com. Come and hang out with Brian and I and his amazing team.
Right on.
River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, the one and only Dr. Aaron Judkins is with us. And this is the part of the show, this last segment, I am going to push Aaron to the very edge. He's just going to, these are my favorite subjects right now. And I'm going to start here, if I can, Aaron. I just saw, I'm going to make this very quick. We have limited time. I just saw a documentary from Porsche, the car company. Okay. The documentary was about them over the last 2 years, 4 years actually, of them taking a Porsche 911 4-wheel drive version to the highest point a car has ever driven on Earth. Okay. You know where they did it? Peru. Okay. Now, to break the world record, they want to get to 22,000 feet. Watching them struggle to get this car, they're at 12,000 feet, oxygen, right? 13,000 feet, 500 feet at a time, getting this thing, and they get to 15,000 feet. And the point being, and they make it, they break the record, and you should watch the documentary, but you're watching modern technology struggle, right? And you think about, I've been to Peru, right? And you go to these different altitudes and you're like, well, they built that pretty easily, right? And we can't get a Porsche up the hill, but yet they're getting 50-ton blocks up to these heights. And it's the same thing repeated around the world, which would suggest to me there was something before. There was something before Göbekli Tepe. There was a civilization. Somebody is teaching engineering, cosmology, the seasons, farming. All of this is coming from teachers that came before. Am I going out on a limb and stretching this, or we see the evidence all around us, and is Göbekli Tepe, again, evidence of that? Teachers that came in and showed them how to quarry, how to move stones, how to do this building, the stars, math. There seems to be something before. And what would freak out the world more? E.T. or Atlantis? Or, you know what I mean? Evidence of some ancient culture 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to answer this, but let me just say that I'm going to kind of diverge off the archaeological path for a minute so I can give you this answer, because this is not a standard archaeological answer. And here it is. You're right. There is an influence there. And the subtitle of the book, which I put up here, by the way, is Decoding Göbekli Tepe, Biblical Anatolia, that's the region, and the Watchers. That's the subtitle, Biblical Anatolia and the Watchers. I think the influence comes from the Watchers. We see this, that's very well documented in the book of First Enoch that was found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way. It's an apocryphal book, but it gives the names of 200 class Watcher angels that descended on Mount Hermon. And it tells them, it describes what they were doing. They made a pact and how they interfered in the affairs of mankind by teaching knowledge and certain forbidden sciences and astrology and weapons and the art of warfare, all these things. And so and this is an indirect biblical tie to it, but when you look at the actions of the Watchers, the action of a Watcher was just a Watcher class angels that were designed to watch and record mankind. But in the book of Jude in the Bible, it says that they left their first estate, which means they transferred into a physicality. And once they made that move, they could never go back to a celestial estate. So they had to live out a physicality, and their children begat the Nephilim and the Rephaim. These are the giants, the men of renown, the men of old that the Bible talks about in Genesis 6. This is where we get the accounts of the biblical giants, the story of David and Goliath, L.A. Marzulli, On the Trail of the Nephilim, the hunt for these giants. We see in the archaeological record creeping up indirectly, directly at times, but we see evidence for the Nephilim. This all goes back to the story of the Watchers that's documented in the book of Enoch. And I think Enoch is the answer to the influence of mankind, what's happening. And that influence, I think, came directly to mankind. And then as it passed down, you're right, there were teachers that said, hey, I can show you how this works and how to do it. It's interesting, going back to the archaeology answer, is that there's a sudden emergence of culture that springs up that's not there before. And all of a sudden, this is post-Younger Dryas, but you have a sudden emergence of civilization. There's no evolutionary civilization happening here from a long scale. It suddenly springs up. Why? Because we have the invention of written language, we have alphabet, we have the wheel, we have pottery,
roads.
We have roads. We have a lot of things that are happening, but it's a sudden emergence of civilization. This is what archaeologists is puzzled about.
Yeah, but this isn't just in the Fertile Crescent. This isn't just in the Armenian Highlands.
Right.
It isn't just in Egypt. It's also all over Central and South America.
And that's why there's a commonality in their architecture and in their megalithic architecture, their building, their religious ideology, what they were doing. There's a commonality there that's separated by time and it's separated by distance. Yet we see, 500 ubiquitous flood legends around the earth that are separated by time and distance. Cultures that are not related to each other, yet they have a flood myth story. We see this in the building architecture. We see this. We see pyramids in South and Central America, ziggurats. The first pyramid in Mesopotamia was a step pyramid ziggurat. So we see
got them in China too. Got them in China too.
Yeah, there's a commonality throughout the ancient cultures that's happened. I documented in the Alien Agenda book there behind me. I talk about some of those commonalities, and it's interesting because
well, I'm cutting you off because we've got too much. Let me get another question. Same subject.
Okay.
What are we talking about though in a linear time scale? Are we talking about the Watchers 100,000 years ago? Are we talking about the Watchers 50,000 years ago? Not necessarily at 10,000 BC.
It's a great question. The answer is we don't know for sure. The second part of that answer is it depends on what time frame you're going to use. If you're using a standard chronology time frame, you can push that back to hundreds of thousands of years ago. Mm-hmm. If you're using a biblical time frame, you're not going to push it back that far. It's going to be a little bit different. But the answer is that the influence started at the very beginning. At the very beginning is where the influence started. And so if you read Enoch, which is an amazing book, I'm not saying that it's hand inspired, but it can give us some, some historical insight to what's happening in those days. The book of Jasher is another one. The book of Jubilees is another one. Again, these are apocryphal books, but they're interesting reads. And I think Enoch, now there's 3 books of Enoch, by the way. Second and third book, I don't put any credibility into those, so don't read those. It's the first book of Enoch. But I think it gives some historical insights on what's happening then. But this goes back to the very beginnings, Jimmy, when those watcher angels actually interfered in the affairs of mankind when they were not supposed to. And they were worshipped as gods. This is where now you get into the story of the Anunnaki, and we were seated here called the panspermia theory and other things. And the cultures, because they did regard these were 2/3, the Nephilim were 2/3 human, 1/3 God. And now by the time you get to the Greek and Roman cultures, now you have these stories, they've changed over time, but now you have the stories of Zeus and Apollo and these god men that have supernatural powers, right? This goes back to a grain of truth that actually happened in the very beginning. These Nephilim were 2/3 men, 1/3 God.
Would that apply to the gods of Egypt as well?
I don't think so, because the Pharaoh was the embodiment of the deity in life. So he became the Pharaoh, or she. We know there was others.
But I mean, before that with Sekhmet and Osiris and Osiris.
They were deified. They were deified. Now we know that people like Nimrod was deified after he died. Noah was deified after he died. But when you get to the pharaohs, they are living embodiments of those gods. And so what they say went, that was it. And they had it went up a notch. By the time you get to Egyptian history, they took it up a notch, and it was very evident in the Egyptian history, which is fascinating in itself. But
the Watchers you mentioned, I keep cutting you off, Aaron. When you see me in person, when you see me in person, just punch me in the throat. You've got one good karate chop. That's what
a good host does, and it's a fascinating discussion, and I'm really enjoying it.
Now, you mentioned the Watchers being celestial. All right.
Yeah.
I have no issues with an ET extraterrestrial aspect to this. And it's not because of the obvious. They're celestial. They came from the heavens. They come down. Well, that's an easy tie. Anybody could make that. Anybody could go there, and probably should. But no, God, if there is a God, I don't know if there is, but if there is a God, God is universal and he created everything. Well, then he's E.T. He didn't just create the earth. He created everything, right?
Are you saying God's ET or the Watchers?
God. Well, no. So the Watchers just fall under that umbrella, I would think. And when you look at the movie Noah, which you and I have talked about, right, in the past, when you see the movie Noah, which by the way is actually pretty good. I'm just going to say it. Okay, people can argue with me, but I think it's a pretty good movie. It feels science fiction to me. And there's some science fiction ET aspects to it. It feels that way. And I would say that the Bible feels that way. I can't say it to be true, but it just feels that way. L.A. Marzulli, will tell you it's the best science fiction ever written, right? So is it wrong? Is it heresy to suggest that the Watchers and the way that they're portrayed in the Bible and historically, that they may be extraterrestrial?
Here they're not extraterrestrial, because when you say extraterrestrial, you're saying a terrestrial organic creature from another planet.
I am saying that. And I'm also suggesting, Aaron, I'm not playing around with this. I'm being very direct.
Yeah.
The Watchers could not have been, if we take it as it is, the Watchers weren't just here on Earth.
No.
They were on every planet in the universe.
Well,
right? I mean,
they could have been. We know that they were celestial beings. They were created to be celestial beings, and they left their first estate and went into a physicality and became physical beings, which when they died, then they become disembodied spirits. But in that regard, in a broad sense, I guess the answer could be yes. They could go anywhere at will. And we see that they actually came down to the earth where humankind was to actually be worshiped as gods and set themselves up a rulership here on the earth, which they were not supposed to do. Now, I'm not talking about all of them. I'm talking about some of them have done this. It's all recorded back in Genesis and in the book of Enoch and other places. And we see this outside the sources of the Bible too. But
now, where's the first estate?
Okay, the first estate was their first habitation, which was in the heavenlies. It was a celestial estate.
They're ET. Exactly.
That's what that means.
So you're saying that they were ET. That's what.
Well, I wouldn't call it ET, but I would say definitely they were an alien celestial being who came down on this planet and set up a habitation to cohabit with women. And those offspring become the Nephilim, and those all get worshipped as gods. And they are not here, on our behalf. They are here with an ulterior motive, and that was to be worshipped as gods and to rule. They did not want to benefit mankind, although they did pass knowledge down to mankind. Ultimately, it was to mankind's detriment that happened. Why? Because we see the destructive and evil nature of the Nephilim, and we see the different physical characteristics. They were evil in nature, and this is why we see even later on, a lot of these giants being fought in history because they had such an evil nature about them. But they were definitely very large. They had superhuman strength. They were, like I said, they were 2/3 human, 1/3 God, and they could do things that were not normal. But this is all an interplay from something that happened in the past, and it was that cosmic rebellion that occurred in the very beginnings that has now bled over into the earth, and now we're seeing evidence of it now in in our modern day times, and the UFO phenomenon and spiritual entities, things that are happening, people see. I mean, I had a UFO sighting at 17, Jimmy. I write about it in the book there. I was with 3 of my high school buddies. We could not figure it out. I live here in Glen Rose, where that Stephenville Glen Rose UFO event happened in 2008 or 9, the Stephenville Lights. We have a nuclear plant in our county. It's Somerville County. That sighting started over the nuclear plant and went towards Stephenville. It's a cattle, the cattle capital of Texas. These are ranchers and farmers out there. They have no business being in the U.S. This is not anything they're doing. But yet we have witness sightings by the sheriff's department, by the postmaster, by Steve Allen, who I interviewed for the book, is a pilot of 30 years, and others,
great guy. Yeah,
who witnessed all this. That was in 2000, I think 8 or 9. I can't remember exactly. But look, there's an interplay that's happening even now, and I talk about actually at the end of the book at Decoding Gobekli Tepe. I talk a little bit about why this matters today and why does this relate to me today? And there's something that's happening that I talk about in the afterword of the book, because there's a tie to all this, and as we see, the saying, there's nothing new under the sun. And so what we see that's happened in the past is now happening again, maybe in a different way, but there's something sinister. Remember, Art Bell used to say what did he say? The quickening. He used to say the quickening, right? And that was just a term that he came up with that said something is coming. Something's coming, and it may not be good. So, this all ties in with the spiritual phenomenon of what's happening at Gobekli Tepe, and then what's happening today. So it's very
well. Continue with that thought. I want to hear it.
Well, okay. When you unpack the spiritual veil, so when you go from the Watchers and the influence of the Watchers, which gets into the theology part of things and the spiritual side, and we had to, because this explains the cosmology of the ancients, especially at Gobekli Tepe, which that first theory is what we're calling the Regeneration Theory. And so there's a spiritual aspect to what they're doing in these enclosures in the sacred space, because it has to do with the afterlife. But there's an influence here that is, I think, plays into exactly what they were doing in these enclosures. And the influence comes from the deification of the moon and the deification of the bull. And we see both of this iconography on both of the central pillars in enclosure D. Western pillar 31, Eastern pillar 18. What do they have? Eastern pillar 18, crescent moon, a full disk, which I think is the full moon, and a kind of an H-looking letter. It's not an H, but it kind of looks like that. On Western pillar 31 is an iconography of the bull in the skull. It's a bull cranium. Now, why would that be on the neck? No face, but on the neck of these anthropomorphic pillars. And here it is. The second theory that I'm putting in the book is that there's linguistics to Gobekli Tepe. That's not, just as I was initially wrong on that belt, which is a belt. That's not art motifs on that belt, Jimmy. That is language. And here's the thing. If it's language, here it is. It's called Anatolian hieroglyphics. And in Anatolian hieroglyphics were discovered in the 1800s, but it got misclassified as hieroglyphic Hittite. And it wasn't until the 1930s that they found something at a site called Kara Tepe, not to be confused with Karahan Tepe. It's Kara Tepe. But in the I think it was 1943. What did they discover on the stones at Kara Tepe? Anatolian hieroglyphics, which is specifically Louwian logograms. Now, Louwian was a culture that lived contemporaneous with the Hittites. They spoke and the Hittites knew Sumerian, but they also had a formal writing for monumental stone for formal occasions. The Hittite adopted this Louwian language into their culture. And it was
but there's always been a dating on that of around 2000 BC. And if we look at that, and I agree with you, right? But we've got to go back another 9,000 years.
And that's the thing. There's a chronology issue here. So if these are Louwian logograms, and here's a very clear one on Gobekli Tepe. It's the Louwian. What's a logogram? Let me back up. It's a symbol that represents a word. Okay, a symbol that represents a word. Now, when they discovered Louwian logograms at Kara Tepe in 1943, there's a very clear Louwian logogram on the stone at Gobekli Tepe, and it's the logogram for Deus. That's the transliteration in Latin, which means God. That is a known symbol in Louwian logogram. It's well established. There's no debate about it. It means Deus. It means God. That is on the stone at Gobekli Tepe. But let's go back to the H. That H-looking symbol is also a Louwian logogram, and that means gate or portal. Now, when you look at the eyes, if you think of an English eye on the stones at Gobekli Tepe, that is Louwian logogram for house, or for another way you could put it as temple. And we have all these logograms that are well known, well established at Gobekli Tepe. So the second theory is the Louwian linguistic logograms, the language, the linguistic ties to Louwian. If I'm saying this is a theory, if it's Louwian, then we have a chronology issue here, because we can't push Louwian back that far in time.
You can't. 8,000 years is a long frigging
You can't
time.
push it back that far. Now, there's another language that's similar to Louwian logogram. It's called also Anatolian hieroglyphic is a broader term for it. There's another language that is similar to that used logograms. I'm going with the Louwian because we know the symbol for Louwian for the term God is Deus on that stone at Gobekli Tepe. This is all documented in the book. And if you follow the references in the book, it'll take you to all these it's all sourced. So it's not just me coming up with it. It's all sourced. And a lot of it in academic literature that has nothing to do with theology or the Bible. It's academic literature. And so if this is Louwian logograms, specifically Anatolian hieroglyphics, then we have to reconsider where we put Gobekli Tepe. And what I would like to see is, because I'm not an expert in Louwian, I've been studying it for 5 years, but look, a lot of the Louwian symbols are not even deciphered yet because we don't have any context to decipher them yet. And there's a handful of scholars who understand Louwian. They know it, but it's just a handful. There's not very many. But what I would like to see is Louwian scholarship to come out and look at this independently and say, are these Louwian logograms on the stones at Gobekli Tepe? Or is it something else? And it could be something else. I'm open to it. That's why I'm calling this a theory. But look, it's very clear that logogram for Deus is on that stone. And if you could transliterate it into English on Eastern Pillar 18 with the H and the crescent moon, you could say this is the gate or the portal of the moon god. Now, that's a very loose translation, but you have these images that are not art motifs. I think it's language, and it's conveying.
No, it's
thought.
intentional. It's intentional, Aaron.
I like.
I like where you're going with this, but the process needs to be applied as you are suggesting. Throw away the stuff. Let's go at this fresh, just clean slate, and let's approach this a bit different. Look, those H's, I have talked about those H's so much. Why? They stand out.
Yeah,
that is deliberate, man. That is deliberate.
And what I think it's
I don't think it's artistic license. I don't think it's artistic.
No,
license.
It's not. No, it's language, because Louwians use this language specifically for writing on monumental stone for probably rituals or ceremonies or maybe government reasons, we don't know. But again, this is way past Gobekli Tepe on the conventional timeline. They were contemporaneous with the Hittites. We don't know a lot about the Louwian culture. We just don't. But what we do know is that they used logograms, which the Hittites adopted. And they use that language specifically to write on monumental stone, exactly what we see at Gobekli Tepe. So there's something happening here. What I would like to see, and perhaps what I'm predicting, is that in future excavations and other enclosures, I think perhaps more logograms will come out on these stones where scholarship can go in there and take a look at it and say, this is Louwian logograms, and it is language.
Well,
and
you
I
know
think
what's weird? This is what I don't think it's a stretch, but I see the coincidence. All right, the famous quote, there are no coincidences. But when you go to that pillar at Tiwanaku, there's an H on it. Okay.
Wow.
And then across the street, now remember, you said the I symbol could possibly be temple or portal, right?
House or temple.
Yeah. And across the street at Pumapunku, you've got the H blocks.
Right.
And on the H blocks, again, I don't know. I'm just going with what you're seeing these connections
right
in person, right? It's different when you see it in person. And so, but at Gobekli Tepe, on each one of those H blocks, there's a portal carved on the bottom half of each H block. There's one on the top, one on the bottom, and they're all over. I've seen the same thing in Egypt. I've seen the same thing in North America. I've photographed these images of these doorways all over the world, and I've been very, very vocal about this. There is something there. There is something, and it's repeated. But if you go to the timeline of what is suggested with both Tiwanaku and you have a Maru Muru too as well, which is extraordinary. Same shape. You have the H blocks of Pumapunku, and they're dating this now to around 15,000 BC, which would almost be in the older Dryas, not the younger Dryas, by the way, right? and then you go back over to Egypt, and you go to Sumer, and you go to Gobekli Tepe. You're looking at this same timeline where we're pushing things back, not in a modern sense, right? When I say modern, I'm talking about 3000 BC, but we're pushing this back way far with the same symbolism happening with separate cultures from around the world that shouldn't have any contact with each other.
Yeah.
And you know, and what's fascinating with that, it kind of goes back to the Watchers. I'll say Atlantis. I say Atlantis only to suggest a civilization that was there before us, that was teaching this stuff universally, and all the cultures around the world were using it at the same time. And that, to go with this a logo script suggesting an idea or a word with an image, and you see that same image possibly representing the same thing around the world, man.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought of that. I haven't made that connection. That's a very interesting connection, Jimmy, that you made there. It would not surprise me if it turns out to be something like that. There needs to be obviously some work done on it, perhaps by others, but I think you're onto something. There is no coincidences, and it looks like a mystery, and it is until you start putting together the connections. And this is what I had to do with decoding Gobekli Tepe. This is one single source where you can find all this in one volume, and it's referenced, hundreds of references. If you just follow the references, you're going to see I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm saying just read it and make up your own mind. But it's something that I think it's a reasonable answer to what we're seeing at Gobekli Tepe. Of course, we don't have all the answers yet because not all the site's been excavated. But it's one source that's up to date that we can see that maybe perhaps if we just look at a different perspective about Gobekli Tepe, we can come to an understanding, maybe a clearer understanding of what they were doing and what they believed and why they were there and what they were doing. And this is really what took me down this whole journey, because, look back to our conversation when you asked me if that was a belt. When I went back and looked at this again and started researching for the book some 5 years ago, that blew my mind. That really blew my mind. And so, and when these images on the necks, nobody was talking about that. And when I saw the logo logo language on for Deus, well, that's not supposed to be there. What's that doing there? So, man, I really went down a journey on this. I had to kind of back up and explain some foundational things so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. So I do talk about the younger dryas. There's some appendixes in the back of the book. The afterword is absolutely fascinating because that ties it into today. The other linguistic language that we haven't talked about, and I'll just mention, is the Sumerian language. And there's a tie in the Sumerian language. I don't know Sumerian, but I can look up a Sumerian lexicon and look at the language in Sumerian and what it means and how it relates to the stones at Gobekli Tepe. It will blow your mind, because the Sumerian peels that onion layer back. And in Sumerian, it's very clear, I think, of who those two central pillars are. And the meanings in the Sumerian language is very specific to the regeneration theory that I'm proposing. And so those two linguistic links are amazing in the book. And it's all new. This just came out just weeks ago. It's all brand new. You can find it linked up on my site, aaronjudkins.com. I got all my work there. You can find it on Amazon. It's live. We asked it if you now, when you say we've only got 1 minute left. When you say regeneration, I have my definition of regeneration. What the heck are you suggesting here, Aaron? The regeneration is after you die, the regeneration of your spirit back in the afterlife, back to the heavens. And the reason I say that is because in their cosmology, they had a belief system that through their ancestors and through the acts of what they were doing, that would help your spirit move from the netherworld to the afterlife, back to the heavenlies, where you were created as a ancestor, or you were created back to a star god. And so when they looked up in the stars, they believed those stars were probably represented gods. And this is why they revered constellations. I think, like specifically Orion and Taurus, I think is some of the constellations that they were perhaps venerating at the site, because they have deified the image of the bull. But the regeneration is this whole concept of life after death and how your spirit gets reborn back into eternity. That's what that means. Amazing conversation. And everybody can get the book. Do you sign books? I do. If you want, you just go to my website. You'll have to hit the contact form. Send me an email. If you can mail me the book, I'll be glad to sign it and send it back off to you. I've had some people do that. It's a new book. It's a new way to look at Gobekli Tepe. I just ask that people would if you read it with an open mind and just follow the references and see if you can come to the same conclusion. Just make up your own mind on it. But it's so fascinating and so intriguing that I think it gives us a little bit of a closer answer to understanding Gobekli Tepe. Yeah, I think it's the most important site currently on this planet. That's my take. Aaron, thank you so much, my friend. I don't know when I'm going to see you again, but be welcome. Safe. And I look forward to our next conversation, man. I do too, Jimmy. On the show. Hey, thank you so much for having me on. God bless, and have a great year. You're the best. Aaron Judkins, everybody. Thank you so much, Aaron. And the links for Aaron are below over on our website. And, of course, we have it up on social media. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Let me look at something really quick before I say good night. And that is tomorrow night, Heather Arnold is with us. Now, tomorrow night, continuing tonight's discussion, sort of, everything's connected. Tomorrow night, we're going to talk about her research to giants in Aruba. All of that and much more tomorrow night with Heather. Until then, Gobekli Tepe. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed.
Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Gobekli Tepe.